Before we dive in, a quick favor. If you find these deep dive crime stories compelling, consider subscribing. It's completely free, and it helps bring more untold cases to light. Your support keeps these stories alive. Now, let's get into today's case. It was supposed to be the beginning of a beautiful love story. A wedding straight out of a fairy tale, flowers lining the aisle, friends and family gathered, the bride in a flowing white gown, and the groom waiting at the altar. Eyes filled with devotion. They exchanged vows, promising to love and cherish each other until death, but neither of them knew just how soon death would come knocking. Just days after the wedding, the groom stumbled upon a truth so shocking, so earth-shattering, that it unraveled everything he thought he knew about the woman he had just married. And the way he reacted, it would leave an entire town reeling in horror. A love story turned tragedy, a marriage built on a secret, and a discovery that led to an unthinkable crime. By the time the truth came out, it was already too late. A picture-perfect couple, a love that was meant to last forever. But beneath the surface, there was a secret no one saw coming. When the truth was finally revealed, the consequences were beyond tragic. What really happened inside that house? What drove a newlywed to commit an unthinkable act? Stay with me, because this story is about to take a turn you won't believe. Love has a way of making the impossible seem real. It sweeps people up like a raging tide, carrying them to places they never expected to go. That was exactly how David felt when he met Isabel. It was as if the universe had conspired to bring them together, two strangers lost in their own separate lives, suddenly finding solace in each other's presence. From the moment their eyes met across that crowded cafe, something shifted. A connection formed, one neither of them could explain. It was magnetic, electric, almost like destiny itself had written their love story long before they even knew it had begun. David had never been the type to believe in fairy tales. He was practical, logical, always measured in his emotions. But Isabel, she was different. There was something about her that felt otherworldly. She was beautiful, yes, but it wasn't just her looks. It was the way she carried herself, the way she spoke, the way she made him feel like the only man in the room. She was soft-spoken but confident, mysterious but inviting. And when she smiled, it was as if the entire world had suddenly been set ablaze with light. Their love story unfolded like something out of a dream. Late-night conversations that stretched until dawn, long walks in the park, where they whispered secrets only they would ever know. Candlelit dinners, stolen kisses under the glow of city lights. David found himself falling deeper than he ever thought possible. He had dated before, he had loved before, but nothing like this. With Isabel, everything felt new, everything felt right. And when the day came that he got down on one knee, ring in hand, heart pounding in his chest, he didn't even need to ask the question before the answer left her lips. Yes, she breathed, tears glistening in her eyes. Yes, 1,000 times yes. It was the happiest moment of his life. The wedding was nothing short of perfect, a small but elegant ceremony, held in a beautiful garden beneath a canopy of twinkling lights. Friends and family gathered, watching as the two of them vowed to love each other for eternity, for better or for worse, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. Words spoken with unwavering devotion, words that should have bound them together forever. As David slid the ring onto Isabel's finger, he thought he had finally found his forever. He thought he knew everything about the woman standing before him, her past, her dreams, her fears. He believed she had bared her soul to him completely. But he was wrong. Because Isabel had a secret she had never shared, a secret so deep, so carefully buried, that even the man who swore to spend his life by her side had no idea it existed. And this secret, it would change everything. That night, as they danced under the stars, lost in the warmth of each other's embrace, there was not a single trace of doubt in David's mind. He had married the love of his life. He had found his happily ever after. But happiness is fleeting. And in just a few days, that perfect dream would turn into a waking nightmare. Because secrets have a way of unraveling. And when they do, they don't just change lives, they destroy them. David had no idea that his new wife wasn't who she said she was. No idea that the love story he had believed in so blindly was built on a foundation of hidden truths. And when he finally discovered the reality of it all, it would be too late. Love deception, a horrifying truth waiting to be uncovered, and a crime that would send shockwaves through an entire town. This wasn't just a love story anymore. It was the beginning of something much, much darker. What was Isabel hiding, and how did it lead to bloodshed? By the time David learned the truth, there would be no turning back. For some, love is love. For others, love is only as strong as the truths it's built upon. And on that fateful night, David's world came crashing down in a way he never saw coming. It started with a whisper, a passing comment, a moment so small, so seemingly insignificant that at first he didn't even register it. A joke from a friend, harmless, playful, something about Isabel's past, but something about the way they said it, something about the way they quickly tried to brush it off. It didn't sit right with him. It gnawed at the back of his mind like an itch he couldn't scratch. And then there was the document. An old medical record buried deep in a drawer, left forgotten beneath a stack of papers. David hadn't meant to find it. He had been looking for something else entirely. But there it was. His hands trembled as he read the words. His heart pounded so loudly in his ears that for a moment he thought he might be imagining things. But no, it was real. It was staring him in the face. Isabel had been born someone else. The room seemed to close in around him. His vision blurred, his fingers went numb, his mind raced, spinning wildly out of control, grasping at memories, at moments, at all the things that suddenly didn't make sense. The way she had hesitated when talking about her childhood, the vague answers she had given about her past relationships, the slight tension in her shoulders whenever he asked about her family. It was all there, hiding in plain sight, and yet he had never seen it. His wife, his perfect, beautiful, gentle wife, had been keeping the biggest secret of all. For some, love is love. For others, this was betrayal. David felt sick. His stomach twisted into knots. His chest tightened until he could barely breathe. He had promised his life to Isabel. He had vowed to love her, to cherish her, to stand by her no matter what. But now, he felt like a stranger in his own marriage. He stormed into the bedroom, his mind spinning, his pulse pounding. Isabel was there, sitting on the edge of the bed, unaware of the hurricane about to hit. She turned to him with a soft smile, the kind that had once melted his heart. But tonight, all he saw was a lie. "Tell me the truth," he demanded, his voice sharp, trembling with a fury he barely recognized. "Tell me everything, right now." Her smile faltered, her face paled. And in that moment, he knew before she even opened her mouth that everything was about to change. The words fell from her lips, hesitant, broken, each syllable heavy with a lifetime of secrets. "David, I was going to tell you. I didn't know how." She reached for him, but he took a step back. A cold distance settled between them, a distance that felt impossible to close. His hands clenched into fists, his jaw tightened, his thoughts screamed. This was the woman he loved, this was the woman he married, but had she ever truly been his? Or had it all been a carefully crafted illusion? He had a choice. He could walk away, he could scream, he could leave and never look back. But instead, he stayed. Not out of love, not out of forgiveness, but out of something darker. Something deeper, something that had begun to take root inside him the moment the truth was revealed. Because for David, this wasn't just about love anymore. This wasn't just about marriage. This was about trust, about identity, about everything he thought he knew, being ripped away in an instant. And as the hours passed, as the storm between them raged on, something inside him snapped. A dangerous thought, a chilling realization. The kind of thought that once it takes hold, never truly lets go. By the time the sun rose the next morning, someone wouldn't make it out alive. Rage. It has a way of consuming a person, of swallowing them whole until there's nothing left but blind fury. And on that night, inside that small, quiet house, something far more terrifying than anger took hold of David. Something far more dangerous. The air was thick with tension. The walls, once filled with laughter and love, now felt suffocating. Isabel stood near the bedroom door, her hands trembling, her face streaked with tears. She had tried to explain. She had begged him to understand, but David wasn't listening anymore. His mind was a whirlwind, memories twisting, shifting, distorting. The love he once felt had been replaced by something dark, something twisted, something uncontrollable. "So what else have you lied about?" David's voice was sharp, venomous. "Was anything real? Was anything true?" Isabel flinched, her breath catching in her throat. "David, please, I love you. That's real. That has always been real." But those words, they only made it worse. Love. How could she say that? How could she stand there and act as if everything hadn't just crumbled beneath him? David grabbed the nearest object, a glass from the nightstand, and hurled it across the room. It shattered against the wall, shards raining down like tiny daggers. Isabel gasped, taking a step back. Fear flickered in her eyes. And for the first time, she realized the man standing in front of her wasn't the man she had married. He was someone else now, someone unrecognizable. There are moments in life where time seems to slow down, where the world around you becomes a blur, and all that remains is the pounding of your own heart. For David, this was one of those moments. The argument had gone too far. The anger had spiraled out of control. And in that split second, as he looked at Isabel, his wife, the woman he had vowed to love and protect, something snapped.
He lunged. She screamed. The struggle was violent, desperate. Isabel fought with everything she had, but David was stronger. His hands wrapped around her throat, tightening, squeezing. She gasped, her nails clawing at his arms, her eyes wide with terror. The room filled with the sounds of struggle, the crashing of furniture, the thudding of footsteps against the floor. Then, silence. A stillness so profound, so unnatural that it seemed to suck the very air from the room. Isabel's body lay motionless on the floor. Her once bright eyes stared blankly at the ceiling. The life in them, gone. David stumbled backward, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His mind was screaming, but his body refused to move. He looked down at his hands, hands that had once held Isabel with love, now stained with something irreversible. Panic set in. His chest tightened, his vision blurred. This wasn't supposed to happen. He didn't mean for this to happen, but it had. And now, there was no going back. He reached for his phone, fingers trembling as he dialed 911. The call was barely coherent. Words tumbled out in fragments. "My wife. She's not breathing. I think I killed her." Minutes later, flashing red and blue lights painted the walls of their once happy home. Officers stormed inside, weapons drawn, voices sharp and commanding. But David didn't resist. He couldn't. He just stood there, frozen in time, staring at the lifeless body of the woman he once loved. The crime scene was like something out of a nightmare. The wedding was supposed to be the beginning of a new life, a forever kind of love. But now, it was the setting for a tragedy no one could have predicted. But was this a crime of passion? A moment of blind rage? Or was there something darker lurking beneath the surface? Something planned? The crime had been committed. The blood had been spilled. But now, the real story was just beginning. What happened inside that house would be analyzed, dissected, and questioned from every possible angle. And as investigators began piecing together the events of that night, something chilling began to emerge. The moment the officers arrived, the house was eerily silent. The only sounds were the faint hum of the refrigerator and the rhythmic ticking of a clock, marking each passing second of a life that could never be undone. David sat on the floor, his knees drawn to his chest, his face buried in his hands. He didn't fight. He didn't run. There was no struggle when the officers placed the cold steel of handcuffs around his wrists. Just a quiet, empty acceptance. The reality of what he had done had sunk in. And in that moment he knew his life was over. But the real horror? It came in the form of a single phone call. A call made just minutes after Isabel took her last breath, and when investigators played back the recording, what they heard sent shivers down their spines. "Operator, 911, what's your emergency?" David's voice, shaky, barely above a whisper, came through the line. I think I killed my wife." "Operator, sir, what do you mean? Is she breathing?" A pause, a deep trembling breath, then, "No, she's dead. Oh God, she's dead." The words alone were disturbing enough. But it wasn't just what David said, it was how he said it. The eerie calm, the resignation in his tone, the absence of panic, the absence of remorse. To the officers listening, this wasn't the sound of a man who had just made a tragic mistake. This was something else, something calculated, something cold. As crime scene investigators stepped into the house, they were met with a disturbing sight. Blood spattered against the white walls. A broken lamp knocked to the floor. The remnants of a struggle, of a life violently stolen. But it was the positioning of Isabel's body that left investigators with an unsettling feeling. She wasn't just lying there, as if she had fallen mid-struggle. No, she had been placed, arranged. Her hands folded neatly across her stomach. Her hair brushed away from her face, almost as if someone had taken care to make her look at peace. But why? Was this an act of guilt, or something far more sinister? It was a small detail, but one that changed everything. Because when detectives took a closer look, they realized this wasn't a crime of passion. This wasn't just blind rage. This was something planned. Inside the cold, dimly lit interrogation room, David sat across from two detectives. His face was unreadable. His hands, still slightly shaking, rested on the steel table. "Detective, tell us what happened, David, from the beginning." David swallowed hard. His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to. I swear, I just lost control." The detectives watched him closely, every flicker of emotion, every nervous twitch. But something was off. His words said one thing, but his eyes, they told another story. "Detective, why did you place her body like that?" Silence, a flicker of something in David's expression. Guilt? Fear? Or something else? "David, I don't know, I wanted her to look peaceful." It was a strange response. A response that didn't quite fit the story he had been telling. And as investigators pressed him further, cracks began to show in his version of events. Inconsistencies. Holes in his timeline. And then, one final revelation sent this case into a whole new direction. As investigators combed through the couple's past, a disturbing discovery was made. This wasn't just a spontaneous act of rage. There were warning signs. There were threats. There was a motive. One message in particular stood out, found on David's phone just days before the wedding. It was a single text, a message sent to a close friend, and it read, "If she ever lies to me, I swear I'll make her regret it." This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a moment of blind rage. This was a promise kept. But the real question remained. Would justice be served? Or would the truth be buried along with Isabel? Just when the world thought they had all the answers, the case took a turn that no one saw coming. The evidence seemed clear, a crime of passion, a husband pushed to the edge by a revelation that shattered his reality. But now, something wasn't adding up. A forensic re-examination of the crime scene revealed an unsettling detail: the wounds on the victim's body. They didn't quite match the initial reports. The angle of the injuries, the force behind the attack, it all suggested that someone else might have been there that night. Someone the investigators had completely overlooked. And then came the biggest shock of all. Security footage surfaced from a nearby gas station, recorded just an hour before the murder. The footage showed the husband, but he wasn't alone. He was speaking with someone, their face partially obscured by the dim lighting. They exchanged something. Was it money? A weapon? A warning? No one knew for sure, but one thing was clear. This was no longer a simple case of a crime of passion. There was another player in this deadly game. And just like that, the internet exploded. Theories ran wild. Some said the husband had an accomplice, someone who had helped him plan the crime. Others believed the murder had been staged, that the victim had been targeted by someone else entirely, and the husband was being framed. A hashtag flooded social media overnight. Hashtag justice for her vs. #lies unfolded. Divisions ran deep. Some saw the husband as a monster, a man who had reacted with unspeakable violence to a truth he couldn't accept. But others weren't so sure anymore. And then, another break in the case. A phone call, one that would change everything. An anonymous tip, a voice on the other end of the line, and the words that sent chills down everyone's spine. You're looking at the wrong person. So, if the husband wasn't the only one there that night, then who was? And more importantly, what was their motive? Because the truth, the real truth, was something no one was ready for. The air in the courtroom was thick with tension. The entire nation had been watching, waiting, some for justice, others for closure. But as the judge prepared to speak, a suffocating silence took hold of the room. The trial had been a media circus from the very start. The prosecution had painted the husband as a cold-blooded killer, a man who had let his rage take over. The defense argued that he had been pushed to his breaking point, that he wasn't thinking clearly in that moment. But what truly shook the courtroom was the revelation of a second suspect. For weeks, the jury had listened to every gruesome detail: the late-night confrontation, the blood-soaked evidence, the conflicting testimonies. But now, after hours of deliberation, they were ready to speak. The judge cleared his throat. "Will the defendant please rise?" The entire courtroom held its breath. "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty." The verdict sent shockwaves through the courtroom. The victim's family clutched each other, some sobbing, others stone-faced. The husband's defense team slumped in their chairs. And then, the sentence was read aloud. "For the crime of murder in the second degree, the court sentences you to life in prison without the possibility of parole." A wail erupted from the defendant's side. His mother collapsed into the arms of his sister, her sobs echoing through the silent chamber. But the husband, he didn't flinch. His face, once twisted with anger, now looked empty, hollow. And just like that, it was over. One life lost, another locked away forever. But as the dust settled, an unsettling question lingered in the air. Was justice really served? The victim's family felt a sense of relief. The pain would never truly leave them, but at least they had a verdict. Some called it justice. Others called it closure. But there were still whispers, questions that refused to die. Because deep down, some people still believed that the whole story had never been told, that there was still something, someone, missing from the puzzle. And then, another twist. Because justice had been served in the eyes of the law. But in the court of public opinion, the real nightmare was just beginning. And just like that, it was over. One life was lost. Another was forever changed. A love story that had started as a dream had spiraled into a waking nightmare, one that neither of them could have ever predicted. The courtroom had emptied, the cameras had stopped rolling, and the world had moved on. But for the people who lived through it, For the families left shattered, there was no moving on. There was only the endless loop of what-ifs. What if the truth had come out sooner? What if the confrontation had never happened? What if the final moments had played out differently? Would there still be a life to mourn? Would there still be a life behind bars? And then, the real question. Was this truly a crime of passion? A moment of rage that spiraled out of control? Or was there something more lurking beneath the surface? Something premeditated? Something inevitable? What do you think? Justice has been served? Or has it? Because even now, the case is still being debated. Some say the sentence was too harsh. Others believe it wasn't harsh enough. And a few still believe that there's more to this story than what we were told. Was there another hand in this tragedy? A secret still waiting to be uncovered? Or was this simply the tragic, inevitable end of a love that was never meant to be? One thing is certain. 2 lives were destroyed that night, but only one will ever have a chance to walk free again. And now, I want to hear from you. Was this a crime of passion or something deeper? Let me know in the comments. Do you think justice was truly served, or was this another case of emotions outweighing the facts? If this story shocked you, just wait until you hear what I'm covering next. Subscribe now and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss it. Because in the world of true crime, the truth is never as simple as it seems. The Untold Crime Chronicles. Subscribe, stay safe, and always question everything.